Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something different. The entire history of getting high. Every substance, every error, every mistake humanity keeps making on repeat. We're talking 10,000 years of fermented fruit, opium dens, Viking mead halls, the war on drugs, fentanyl, and why your morning coffee is absolutely a drug, but nobody wants to admit it. So before we start, go ahead and like the video if you want. Subscribe if that's your thing, and drop a comment telling me where you are and what your relationship with all this is. Because everyone's got one, whether it's caffeine or something stronger. Now settle in, get comfortable, maybe grab some water. This one's long, it's honest, and it doesn't pull punches. We're about to trace the chemical thread that runs through all of human civilization. From the first accidental drunk in prehistory to whatever's happening in your city right now. Let's talk about inheritance. Let's talk about what it means to be born human. Let's begin. Congratulations. You're human, which means you're born with a brain that craves alteration, a body that metabolizes poison for pleasure, and approximately 10,000 years of ancestors who figured out how to ferment literally anything that would sit still long enough. You didn't invent getting wasted. You inherited it. Before you were born, before your parents were born. Before anyone could write down what they were doing or why, humans were already stumbling around, giggling at nothing, seeing things that weren't there, and waking up with regrets they couldn't quite remember. This isn't a bug in your species. This is a feature, possibly the feature. The thing that separates you from every other mammal that accidentally ate fermented fruit and learned absolutely nothing from the experience. You enter this story not as an individual, but as a continuation. Another link in a chain of consciousness, ultras stretching back so far that the beginning is lost in the haze of prehistory. Which is ironic, because haze is exactly what your ancestors were chasing. They didn't have language for it yet. They didn't have laws against it. They didn't even have proper containers. What they had was curiosity, pattern recognition, and an apparent death wish disguised as scientific inquiry. The first time a human got wasted, it was probably an accident. Some Paleolithic forager, maybe 40,000 years ago, maybe more, stumbling through a forest that doesn't exist anymore, looking for literally anything edible, because that's what you do when grocery stores won't be invented for another 39,900 years. They find fruit. The fruit is old. The fruit smells weird. The fruit has been sitting in the sun, fermenting in its own sugars, converting carbohydrates into alcohol through the magic of wild yeast that doesn't care about your survival. Most animals would sniff it, maybe nibble, then move on. You are not most animals. You are human, which means you're willing to eat almost anything once, sometimes twice if the first time was interesting enough. So you eat the fruit, all of it, because moderation is a concept that won't be invented until after agriculture, and even then it won't stick. 10 minutes later, you feel strange. 20 minutes later, you feel good. 30 minutes later, you're explaining to a rock why the sky is actually underwater and you've just been breathing wrong your whole life. 40 minutes later, you're asleep in a bush. The next morning, you feel like death has personally visited you and then left without cleaning up. Here's the thing though. You remember the middle part, the good part, the part where the universe made sense in a way it never had before, where your anxiety about being eaten by something larger than you temporarily vanished, where the cold seemed less cold and the fear seemed less fearful, and everything seemed possible, even things that definitely weren't. So you tell your tribe, you try to anyway. Language is still pretty new, and hangover is definitely not a word yet. But you gesture enthusiastically at the fruit tree, and make sounds that roughly translate to, "That made Sky Friend appear, and take worry meat from headbox." Your tribe, being human, doesn't dismiss this as the ravings of someone who accidentally poisoned themselves. They think we should all try the worry meat removal fruit. They do, it works. Sometimes people vomit. Sometimes people fall down. Sometimes people fight each other. Sometimes people kiss each other. Sometimes people do both. But mostly, people feel different. And different is the most valuable commodity in a life that's otherwise an unrelenting sequence of survival tasks. This is how it starts. Not with intention, not with civilization, not with ritual or religion, or even basic safety precautions. It starts with accident, curiosity, and the fundamental human drive to feel literally anything other than the baseline consciousness that comes standard with your nervous system. You are born into a species that discovered mind alteration before it discovered almost anything else. Before writing, before cities, before agriculture, before the wheel. Your ancestors were getting wasted when they were still living in caves, when fire was cutting-edge technology, when the most advanced tool was a rock that had been made slightly sharper by hitting it with another rock. And they didn't just do it once. They kept doing it. They remembered where the special fruit grew. They went back. They brought friends. They started noticing patterns. This fruit does this. That mushroom does that. These roots do something entirely different. And we probably shouldn't let Throg have them anymore after what happened last solstice. Natural fermentation becomes the first drug dealer, completely unregulated, operating on every continent simultaneously. Anywhere fruit grows, anywhere sugar exists, anywhere yeast can land and start converting carbohydrates into ethanol, humans are discovering the same thing over and over. Stuff that's gone bad makes you feel good, at least temporarily, at least if you don't think too hard about why. Elephants do this too. Drunk elephant is a documented phenomenon. Monkeys definitely do it. Birds occasionally get wasted on fermented berries and fly into windows that won't exist for thousands of years, but the principle stands. The difference is that animals seem to view intoxication as an occasional accident, something that happens when you're hungry and not paying attention. Humans view it as a recreational opportunity, a social event, a religious experience, and eventually a billion-dollar industry. You inherit all of this. Every time you drink, you're participating in something older than empires. Every time you feel that warm spreading sensation, that gentle dissolution of your social anxiety, that sudden conviction that you're much funnier and more attractive than objective reality suggests, you're experiencing exactly what your Paleolithic ancestors experienced, except they were naked, and you probably aren't, although the night is young. The Neolithic Revolution happens, which is a fancy way of saying humans figured out farming around 10,000 BC, and suddenly everything changes. Not because farming is inherently interesting, although your ancestors seem to think it is, but because farming means staying in one place, and staying in one place means you can finally start making alcohol on purpose. This is not a coincidence. Some archaeologists, the fun ones, argue that humans didn't domesticate wheat to make bread. They domesticated wheat to make beer. Bread is what you do with beer ingredients when you're trying to maintain plausible deniability. The evidence supports this. Early human settlements have beer residue. They have brewing vessels. They have what appear to be ancient hangovers archaeologically preserved in the form of medicinal herb stockpiles that suggest someone was regularly making mistakes and then trying to fix them with whatever passed for aspirin in 8000 BC, which was probably more alcohol. You're not farming because you want to farm. Farming is terrible. It's harder than hunting and gathering. It's more work. It's more boring. You're stuck in one place. You can't leave when the weather turns. You're committed. But farming means reliable food surplus, and reliable food surplus means reliable alcohol production. And reliable alcohol production means you can get wasted whenever you want, instead of whenever the forest randomly decides to ferment something. This is worth the trade-off. Apparently, your ancestors think so anyway. They trade nomadic freedom for agricultural stability, and they do it at least partly because they want to control their own intoxication schedule. The Sumerians appear in Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, and they are very, very interested in beer. Like concerning amounts of interested. Like They invent writing partly to keep track of beer production interested. Some of the oldest written texts we have are Sumerian beer recipes, not religious texts, not laws, not poetry, beer recipes. How to make it, how much you made, who gets how much, beer is currency, beer is wages, beer is culture. They have a goddess of beer. Her name is Ninkasi. The hymn to Ninkasi is simultaneously a prayer and a recipe, which is the most human thing possible. You can sing it in a temple, or you can follow the instructions and make beer, or you can do both, which is probably what they did, because religious ceremonies and getting wasted have been basically the same thing since someone first noticed that altered consciousness feels spiritual. Sumerian workers are paid in beer, not money, beer, several liters per day depending on your job. Administrators get more, laborers get less, everyone gets some. This is not a perk. This is how the economy works. You show up, you move bricks or tend fields, or whatever your job is, and at the end of the day someone hands you a jug of beer that's probably still fermenting, and you drink it because clean water is a fantasy that won't be reliably available for another 6,000 years. Beer is safer than water. This is important. This is why everyone drinks all the time. It's not that humans in ancient Mesopotamia are uniquely dissolute. It's that drinking fermented beverages is the only way to hydrate without dying from whatever's living in the river this week. The fermentation process kills bacteria. The alcohol content preserves it. Beer isn't recreational. Beer is survival that happens to feel good. You're not getting wasted because you're irresponsible. You're getting wasted because the alternative is dysentery. The Egyptians show up around 3000 BC and immediately start arguing about beer versus wine. This is the first great beverage debate, and it will continue in various forms until the heat death of the universe. Beer is for workers. Wine is for pharaohs. Except everyone drinks both, and sometimes they mix them, which future civilizations will correctly identify as a mistake, but will continue to do anyway. Egyptian workers building the pyramids are paid in beer. Bread and beer. That's the deal. You move several tons of limestone in the desert heat, and someone hands you a loaf and a jug, and you probably don't even taste it, because you're so dehydrated and exhausted that you're just pouring it directly into your body, while your consciousness tries to remember what being a person feels like. The beer is thick. It's nutritious. It's more like liquid bread than modern beer. You could live on it. People do live on it. Children drink it. Everyone drinks it. A society of functional alcoholics. Except alcoholism hasn't been invented as a concept yet. So everyone's just living their life, slightly buzzed all the time. Wine appears as the luxury option. Grapes are harder to grow than grain. Wine takes more time, more skill, more storage capacity. Wine doesn't go bad as fast if you do it right. Wine can be aged, improved, turned into something that people will brag about at dinner parties 3,000 years later. The Egyptians figure out that different grapes make different wine, that different fermentation times produce different effects, that adding honey makes it stronger, that adding spices makes it interesting. They're not just making alcohol, they're making cuisine, they're making art. They're making something that will eventually require its own vocabulary, its own snobbery, its own entire culture of people who can't just drink something without commenting on its notes and terroir and finish. But we're not there yet. Right now. Wine is just the fancy thing pharaohs drink before making terrible decisions about which neighboring kingdom to invade. The decision-making doesn't improve with sobriety, but at least sober pharaohs don't have the courage to build monuments to themselves that require enslaving entire populations. Wine doesn't make you wise. Wine makes you confident, which is often worse. The ancient Greeks appear around 800 BC and immediately develop opinions about drinking. So many opinions. The Greeks have opinions about everything. But they have especially strong opinions about alcohol, because they've noticed that intoxication and philosophy pair well together, probably too well. Definitely in ways that make sober people uncomfortable. They invent the symposium, which is not a conference. It's a drinking party. Specifically, it's a drinking party where you're supposed to talk about important things like truth, beauty, justice, and why that guy over there is wrong about literally everything. It's TED Talks, except everyone's drunk and no one's wearing pants. Or everyone's wearing pants, depending on which city, state you're in, and what their policy is this week. The Greeks water down their wine. This is important to them. Drinking unmixed wine is barbaric. It's what foreigners do. It's uncivilized. Civilized people mix wine with water at ratios they spend hours debating. 2 parts wine to 3 parts water. 3 parts wine to 5 parts water. It depends on the occasion, the company, the phase of the moon, and how philosophical you're trying to get. They have a god of wine, Dionysus. He's complicated. He's not just the party god, although he is definitely the party god. He's the god of madness, chaos, ecstasy, transformation, and occasionally ripping people apart with your bare hands, while under the influence of divine inspiration. Dionysian festivals are wild. They involve drinking, dancing, animal sacrifice, and behaviors that make the city elders extremely nervous, which is kind of the point. Women especially worship Dionysus. The Maenads, female followers, are famous for going into the mountains, getting absolutely wasted, and doing things that male Greek writers describe with a mixture of horror and fascination. They're breaking social norms. They're experiencing freedom. They're getting so drunk that the patriarchy temporarily stops applying. This cannot stand, according to the patriarchy, but it keeps happening anyway. Plato writes about drinking. Socrates is famous for being able to drink everyone under the table, and then continue philosophizing while everyone else is unconscious. This is presented as a virtue, the ability to consume vast quantities of alcohol and remain coherent is evidence of philosophical superiority. This is terrible advice, but several thousand years of Western philosophy students will try to emulate it anyway. The Romans show up around 500 BC and immediately start drinking more than the Greeks, which the Greeks find offensive. The Romans don't water down their wine as much. The Romans throw parties called Bacchanalia after Bacchus, their version of Dionysus, and these parties are so excessive that the Roman Senate eventually bans them in 186 BC. The ban doesn't work. You can't ban people from worshipping the god of wine by drinking wine. That's just called worship. Roman parties are legendary. Multi-course meals. Entertainment, drinking contests. Vomitoriums, which are not actually rooms for vomiting despite what everyone thinks. But the name is too perfect to abandon, so everyone pretends anyway. The wealthy drink wine from specific regions. They develop the first wine snobbery. This vintage is better. That vineyard is superior. You're drinking what? Local wine, like a peasant. Roman soldiers are paid partly in wine. The wine ration is called posca. It's watered down wine mixed with herbs. It's not good. It's not supposed to be good. It's supposed to be safe to drink, and alcoholic enough to make being a Roman soldier slightly more tolerable. Which requires a lot of alcohol, because being a Roman soldier involves marching everywhere and occasionally getting stabbed by people who are tired of being conquered. The Romans spread viticulture everywhere they conquer. They plant vineyards in France, Spain, Germany, North Africa. This is cultural imperialism, but it's the kind people eventually thank you for. France will spend the next 2,000 years pretending they invented wine, conveniently forgetting that the Romans taught them everything. Around this time, the Celts in northern Europe are drinking mead, which is fermented honey, because grapes don't grow well in places where winter exists. Mead is sweet. Mead is strong. Mead is what you drink before going into battle wearing nothing but blue paint and confidence. The Romans think the Celts are crazy. The Celts think the Romans are soft. Both groups are drunk. Both groups are right. Mead halls become the center of Germanic and Celtic culture. You fight during the day. You drink at night. You tell stories. You boast. You make promises you may or may not keep. You build social bonds through shared intoxication. The leader who provides the most mead commands the most loyalty. It's not a meritocracy. It's a medocracy. You're born into a world where alcohol is already everywhere, has been everywhere for thousands of years, is so fundamental to human culture that removing it would be like removing language or fire or the concept of lying to each other. But alcohol is just the beginning. Opium appears in human history so early that we don't know when it starts. The Sumerians know about it in 3400 BC. They call it whole jill, the joy plant. They're not wrong. Opium is joyful, at least at first, at least if you ignore what happens later. Opium comes from poppies. Poppies are pretty. Poppies are easy to grow. Poppies produce seed pods that, when scored, leak a white latex that dries into brown resin that contains compounds that bind to receptors in your brain that exist specifically to receive them, which raises questions about whether humans evolved with opium, or whether the universe has a sense of irony. You don't eat opium, you smoke it. Or you do eat it. Actually, you can do both. Ancient peoples figure out quickly that consuming opium makes pain go away. Not just physical pain, emotional pain, existential pain, the pain of being conscious in a universe that doesn't care about you. All of it gone, temporarily replaced by a warm floating sensation that suggests everything is fine and always has been and always will be. Which is obviously a lie, but a very convincing one. The Egyptians use opium medicinally. The Greeks use it medicinally and recreationally. Because the Greeks are incapable of discovering anything without immediately trying to have philosophical discussions about it while high. Homer mentions it in the Odyssey. Nepenthe, the drug of forgetfulness, that which banishes sorrow. Helen of Troy, whose face launched 1,000 ships and 1,000 bad metaphors, doses people with it. Everyone feels better. Everyone forgets their problems. This seems like a good idea until you realize that forgetting your problems doesn't make them go away. It just makes you surprised when they return. Opium spreads along trade routes. The Silk Road is named after silk, but should probably be named after all the drugs being smuggled along it. Opium. Cannabis. Various roots and herbs and powders that merchants transport in small containers and sell at enormous markup to people who are very interested in feeling different. The Arabs master opium production. They spread it through the Islamic world. They develop medical texts about its use. They figure out dosages. They discover, probably through trial and error, probably through several high-profile deaths, that opium is dose-dependent. A little bit helps. A lot kills you. The difference between medicine and poison is amount, which is either the foundation of pharmacology or a terrible warning, depending on your perspective. Medieval Europe gets opium through Arab traders and immediately starts having opinions. The Catholic Church is suspicious. Anything that feels that good must be sinful, but anything that works that well for pain management is useful. The Church lands on, it's okay if you're suffering, but not okay if you're enjoying it, which is the most Catholic position possible. Laudanum appears in the 16th century, opium dissolved in alcohol, because someone decided that one mind-altering substance wasn't enough, and maybe combining them would be better. It is better, at least in the sense that it's more effective at making you not care about anything. Laudanum becomes the aspirin of its era. Headache, laudanum. Toothache, laudanum. Sadness, laudanum. Child won't stop crying, give them laudanum. This seems like bad parenting now, but in an era with zero access to actual pediatric medicine, drugging your infant into compliance is considered responsible. By the 1800s, opium is everywhere in the West. It's in patent medicines. It's in cough syrup. It's in tonics and elixirs and cure-alls that promise to fix everything from consumption to moral weakness. No one's calling it addiction yet. They're calling it frequent use, or habitual indulgence, or medical necessity. The rebranding as addiction won't happen until people start dying in numbers large enough to make denying it impossible. China has an opium problem, not a small problem, a civilization-threatening problem. The British are smuggling opium into China in industrial quantities because Chinese tea is very popular in Britain and the British need something to trade. The Chinese government says no. The British say yes. The British say yes with warships. This is called the Opium Wars. And it's exactly as bad as it sounds. Britain forces China to accept opium imports. Millions of Chinese citizens become addicted. The Qing dynasty destabilizes. This is imperialism at its most nakedly evil, but it's also wildly profitable. Which to the British Empire is the only metric that matters. You're born into a world shaped by drugs. Not metaphorically. Literally. National boundaries are drawn based on who controlled which drug trade. Economies rise and fall on cultivation and trafficking. Wars are fought over production rights. Your textbooks will call these events by other names, but the underlying cause is almost always somebody wanting to control consciousness alteration and somebody else disagreeing. Cannabis appears in human history around the same time as agriculture, possibly earlier. Hemp grows wild in Central Asia. The Scythians use it. They build little tents, throw cannabis seeds on hot stones, and hotbox themselves in what is possibly the earliest recorded use of indoor growing operations. Herodotus writes about this in 440 BC, describing how the Scythians howl with joy in the smoke, which is ancient Greek for they're really high. Cannabis spreads everywhere. China uses it for fiber, for food, for medicine. The Chinese medical text Shen Nung Pen Sao, from 2737 BC, mentions cannabis for treating gout, malaria, and absent-mindedness. The absent-mindedness cure is ironic, because cannabis definitely doesn't help with that. But ancient Chinese medicine is operating on different principles, and also everyone involved is probably high. India develops a whole religious tradition around cannabis. Bang, a drink made from cannabis leaves, milk, and spices, becomes part of Hindu festival celebrations. Shiva, one of the major gods, is associated with cannabis. Consuming it is an act of worship. This is convenient. This is the dream. Imagine if your religion required you to get high. The Hindu tradition makes it work. Cannabis isn't recreational. It's sacramental. Except it's also definitely recreational. It's both. Humans are good at making things be both. The Middle East and Africa cultivate cannabis extensively. It spreads along trade routes. Hashish, concentrated cannabis resin, becomes popular because it's easier to transport than plant material. You can hide a lot of alteration in a small package. Smuggling becomes an art form. So does detection. So does punishment. The war on drugs starts centuries before anyone calls it that. But the basic principle is the same. Some people want to alter their consciousness. Other people want to stop them, and violence ensues. Cannabis reaches the Americas through slavery and colonization. Enslaved Africans bring cannabis seeds. Hemp becomes a cash crop. The founding fathers grow hemp. George Washington grows hemp. Thomas Jefferson grows hemp. They claim it's for rope and paper, which is true. But also several of their journals contain suspiciously detailed observations about separating male and female plants, which you only do if you're interested in maximizing cannabinoid production, which you only care about if you're interested in the fun part. No one can prove the founding fathers were smoking hemp. But no one can prove they weren't, and the circumstantial evidence is compelling. And it would explain so much about the Declaration of Independence, which is either a brilliantly reasoned argument for natural rights, or the manifesto of people who were very high while writing it. Possibly both. Cannabis stays legal and available in the United States until the 20th century. You can buy it at pharmacies. It's in medicines. It's everywhere. The same people taking opiate tonics are also taking cannabis extracts. Polydrug use is the norm. The concept of drug-free doesn't exist yet because every medicine is a drug, and most of them alter consciousness, and no one thinks this is weird. Mushrooms enter human consciousness even earlier than agriculture. Psilocybin mushrooms grow on every continent except Antarctica. Prehistoric humans definitely encountered them, definitely ate them, definitely had experiences that shaped their understanding of reality, religion. The what counts as a good time. The earliest evidence of ritual mushroom use dates to 9000 BC in North Africa. Cave paintings show figures holding mushroom-like objects. Shamanic figures in what appears to be altered states. You can't prove they're depicting psychedelic experiences, but you also can't prove they're not. And given that humans have been eating these mushrooms for tens of thousands of years, the probability that prehistoric peoples were tripping approaches certainty. Mesoamerican cultures build entire religious traditions around psilocybin mushrooms. The Aztecs call them tiona cattle, flesh of the gods. They're used in religious ceremonies. They're used for divination. They're used to communicate with the divine. Spanish conquistadors show up in the 1500s. See indigenous peoples eating mushrooms and talking to entities the Spanish can't see, and immediately declare this demonic. The Catholic Church bans mushroom use. Indigenous peoples continue using them anyway, in secret, for another 500 years. Psilocybin isn't addictive. You can't get physically dependent on it. You can't really overdose on it. It's one of the safest psychoactive substances known to humans, which is why it's also one of the most illegal in modern times, because drug policy has never been about safety. It's about control. It's about deciding which alterations of consciousness are permitted and which are deviant. The mushroom ceremonies continue in secret through centuries of colonization. Maria Sabina, a Mazatec curandera, introduces mushrooms to Western culture in the 1950s. Gordon Wasson, a banker and amateur mycologist, participates in a ceremony and writes about it in Life magazine. The article is called "Seeking the Magic Mushroom," and it kicks off the psychedelic era. Suddenly white people are interested. Suddenly it's a phenomenon. Maria Sabina later regrets this. Her village is overrun with hippies looking for enlightenment. The sacred becomes commodified. The ritual becomes recreational. This pattern will repeat with every indigenous medicine that becomes westernized. The original context is stripped away. The spiritual framework is discarded. What remains is the chemical and the desire to feel different. You're born into a world where almost every culture has discovered some local way to alter consciousness. If mushrooms grow there, people eat them. If cacti produce mescaline, people consume them. If plants contain DMT, people brew them into ayahuasca. If frogs secrete bufotoxins, people lick them. Humans are nothing if not persistent in their quest to not be sober. Coca leaves in South America, chewed for energy, for altitude sickness, for getting through the day in the Andes. The Inca use coca. It's sacred. It's practical. It's both. You can't separate the spiritual from the utilitarian in traditional cultures because they don't separate them. Everything is medicine. Everything is ritual. Everything is just what you do to survive in an environment that's trying to kill you. Coca leaves are mild. You chew them. You get a gentle stimulation. You're more alert. You're less hungry. You can work longer. This is useful in a subsistence economy. This is just how life works. No one's calling it a drug problem because it's not a problem. It's a solution. The problem is everything else. Then Europeans arrive. Then someone figures out how to extract cocaine from coca leaves. Then everything accelerates. Cocaine is isolated in 1859. By 1880, it's in everything. It's in tonics. It's in wine. Vin Mariani, coca wine, is endorsed by popes and presidents. Thomas Edison drinks it. Ulysses Grant drinks it. Sarah Bernhardt drinks it. Everyone drinks it because it's marketed as medicine, and also because it makes you feel incredible. Sigmund Freud writes, Bacoca, in 1884, enthusiastically endorsing cocaine for depression, anxiety, fatigue, and general malaise. He calls it a magical drug. He gives it to his friends. He gives it to his patients. He takes it himself. He's very excited about cocaine, right up until people start dying and getting addicted, and he quietly stops mentioning that period of his career. Cocaine enters medicine. It's used as an anesthetic. It's in surgery. It's in dentistry. You can get cocaine for a toothache. You can get cocaine for a headache. You can get cocaine because you ask for it. The late 1800s are a wild time for drug regulation, which is to say there isn't any. You can buy heroin and cocaine at the pharmacy. You can buy them in the same product. You can give them to children. No one's checking. No one's counting. No one thinks this might be a bad idea. Coca-Cola is invented in 1886 and originally contains cocaine. This is not a rumor, this is documented fact. The cocaine is removed in 1903, not because of safety concerns but because of racism, because cocaine is increasingly associated with black Americans, and the temperance movement is very interested in using drug policy to reinforce racial hierarchies. You're born into a world where drug prohibition is recent, arbitrary, and rooted in racism and xenophobia, more than any coherent public health policy. The drugs that are banned because of who's using them. Opium is legal when white people smoke it for medicine, but illegal when Chinese immigrants smoke it for recreation. Cocaine is fine until black Americans start using it. Cannabis is acceptable until Mexican immigrants arrive. The drugs don't change. The users change. The laws change to control the users. The 20th century arrives and brings with it the concept of addiction, which is actually just a rebranding of what was previously called habituation or chronic use. Addiction as a medical concept is useful. Addiction as a moral concept is a weapon. The temperance movement, already hostile to alcohol, expands to include all intoxicants. They're not trying to help people. They're trying to enforce their particular vision of moral behavior, which involves being sober and miserable and judging everyone else. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act passes in 1914. It's the first federal drug policy in the United States. It doesn't actually ban opiates and cocaine, but it heavily regulates them, which functionally accomplishes the same thing. Doctors can still prescribe them, but the paperwork is burdensome and the penalties for violation are severe. Overnight, thousands of people who were legally using opiates for medical conditions become criminals. Their doctors become criminals. No alternative treatment is offered. People suffer. People die. This is called progress. Alcohol prohibition happens in 1920. The 18th Amendment bans the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. This is going to go great. This is definitely not going to create a massive black market, organized crime syndicates, and a cultural backlash that will define a generation. Except it does all of those things. Prohibition is a catastrophic failure by every metric except the one metric that matters to its supporters, which is that it makes them feel morally superior. Alcohol consumption does decrease, but it doesn't stop. People make bathtub gin. People smuggle rum from the Caribbean. People drink industrial alcohol and go blind. Organized crime becomes organized because there's suddenly an enormous profit motive in providing something people desperately want and can't legally obtain. Speakeasies proliferate, underground bars, secret passwords, jazz music. The Roaring Twenties are roaring partly because everyone's drunk in defiance of the law. The law is stupid. Everyone knows it. Even the people enforcing it know it. But admitting failure takes 13 years. Prohibition is repealed in 1933. Alcohol is legal again. Everyone celebrates by drinking openly. The lesson, which is that prohibition doesn't work and creates more problems than it solves, is immediately forgotten and will not be remembered for the rest of the century. Psychedelics appear in Western medicine in the 1940s and 50s. Lust is synthesized by Albert Hofmann in 1938, accidentally consumed in 1943. Hofmann describes an intense experience, waves of imagery, synesthesia, a complete alteration of consciousness. The pharmaceutical company Sandoz markets it to psychiatrists. It's used therapeutically. It shows promise for treating alcoholism, depression, end-of-life anxiety. Research is promising. Then it escapes the laboratory. Lust becomes recreational in the 1960s. The counterculture adopts it. Hippies drop acid and talk about consciousness expansion, ego death, seeing God. Timothy Leary tells people to turn on, tune in, drop out. The establishment panics. If your citizens are questioning reality, they might start questioning authority. This cannot stand. Lust is banned in 1968. All the promising research stops. It remains illegal for decades. Scientists who want to study it face bureaucratic nightmares. The research doesn't resume until the 2000s, when a new generation of scientists has to rediscover everything the 1960s researchers already knew. MDMA is synthesized in 1912, forgotten, rediscovered in the 1970s. It's used therapeutically by psychologists. It's used recreationally at clubs. It makes you feel empathy, connection, love for everyone around you. It's called ecstasy, which is accurate. It becomes popular. It's banned in 1985. The same pattern repeats. You're born into a world conducting an enormous experiment. What happens when you make consciousness alteration illegal? The answer, visible everywhere you look, is that people do it anyway, but with worse outcomes. Illegal drugs are unregulated. Potency is unknown. Contamination is common. Seeking help becomes risky. People die from uncertainty. People die from contaminated supplies. People die from not knowing what they're taking. People die from refusing to seek medical help because they're afraid of prosecution. The war on drugs begins in 1971. Richard Nixon declares drug abuse public enemy number one. This is rhetoric. This is politics. This is not about drugs. John Ehrlichman, Nixon's advisor, will later admit that the war on drugs was designed to criminalize and disrupt black communities and the anti-war left. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented history. The war on drugs costs trillions of dollars. It incarcerates millions of people. It destabilizes countries. It funds cartels. It militarizes police. It accomplishes none of its stated goals. Drug use doesn't decrease, if anything. Drugs become more potent, more dangerous, more available. Prohibition has failed again. Everyone can see it. The policy continues anyway. You're born in 2000, 2010, 2020, into a world where the contradictions are obvious. Alcohol is legal and kills 140,000 people per year in the United States alone. Tobacco is legal and kills 480,000. Both are heavily taxed and somewhat regulated. Cannabis is illegal federally, but legal in multiple states. Psychedelics are illegal, but showing promise in clinical trials. Opiates are illegal if you buy them on the street, but legal if a doctor prescribes them. Except doctors prescribed them so enthusiastically that they created an epidemic. And now they're pulling back. And people who legitimately need them can't get them. And people who are addicted can't get treatment. The opioid epidemic is what happens when pharmaceutical companies lie. Purdue Pharma insists OxyContin isn't addictive. They market it aggressively. They tell doctors it's safe. Doctors prescribe it liberally. Patients get addicted. Purdue profits. Millions of people become dependent on prescription opiates. Then the prescriptions stop. Withdrawal is agony. Street heroin becomes the alternative. Street heroin is inconsistent. Fentanyl appears in the supply, incredibly potent, microscopically small margin for error. Overdose death spike. They keep spiking. The number becomes numbing. You're born into the aftermath of a crisis that's still happening, that never stopped happening, that might never stop happening. The fentanyl wave crashes over communities like a flood nobody predicted, even though everyone saw it coming. 2 milligrams can kill you. 2 milligrams is less than a few grains of salt. You can't see it. You can't taste it. You can't know it's there until it's too late, until you're not breathing anymore, until your friends are screaming your name and injecting you with naloxone, if they have it, which maybe they do because harm reduction organizations hand it out for free, which they have to do because the government certainly isn't solving this problem. The fentanyl epidemic is what happens when prohibition meets chemistry. You can't grow fentanyl. You synthesize it. You don't need fields in Afghanistan or Colombia. You need a laboratory, precursor chemicals, and a complete disregard for human life. Chinese manufacturers make the precursors. Mexican cartels make the fentanyl. American drug policy makes it necessary. The iron law of prohibition states that the harder you crack down, the more potent the drugs become. Alcohol prohibition gave you moonshine and rot gut. Opiate prohibition gives you fentanyl and carfentanil, which is so strong it's used to tranquilize elephants, and now it's in the heroin supply, and people are dying in parking lots, in bathrooms, in their bedrooms alone. You inherit naloxone kits. You inherit fentanyl test strips. You inherit the knowledge that any pill you didn't watch being dispensed from a pharmacy bottle might kill you. Pressed pills that look exactly like legitimate pharmaceuticals but contain pure fentanyl. Xanax that isn't Xanax. Percocet that isn't Percocet. The shape is right. The color is right. The The stamp is right. The contents will stop your breathing. The response to this crisis is instructive. Some places open supervised consumption sites where people can use drugs under medical supervision, where naloxone is always available, where nobody dies alone on the floor. These sites don't encourage drug use. They acknowledge reality. Reality is that people are using drugs, have always used drugs, will always use drugs, and forcing them to do it in shadows just makes everything worse. Supervised consumption sites save lives. Studies prove this. The data is unambiguous, and yet they're controversial. Because saving the lives of drug users requires admitting they're human beings worthy of not dying. And that's apparently a difficult philosophical position for many people. Other places double down on enforcement. They arrest more people. They prosecute more people. They incarcerate more people. The mortality rate climbs anyway. You cannot arrest your way out of an overdose epidemic. You cannot incarcerate away a public health crisis. You can try. America tries. America's been trying for 50 years. The results speak for themselves, loudly, in the form of death statistics that keep rising. You're born into a world that's slowly, painfully, reluctantly reconsidering drug policy. Cannabis legalization spreads, state by state, ballot measure by ballot measure, despite federal prohibition. Canada legalizes nationally in 2018. Mexico follows. The United States remains federally opposed while individual states create legal markets. It's incoherent. It's hypercritical. It's also progress. Sort of, in the sense that fewer people are being arrested for cannabis possession, which was always the point, which was always about control rather than public health. Cannabis legalization reveals something interesting. When you regulate and tax drugs, they don't destroy society. Colorado legalizes in 2014. The predictions are apocalyptic. Teen use will skyrocket. Impaired driving will skyrocket. Colorado will become a wasteland of stoned zombies incapable of functioning. None of this happens. Teen use remains stable or declines. Tax revenue funds schools. The sky doesn't fall. The worst predictions are that legal cannabis leads to increased use among adults, which is true, and that increased use might lead to increased cannabis use disorder, which is also true. But these outcomes are manageable and vastly preferable to mass incarceration. The legal cannabis industry becomes corporate almost immediately. This is capitalism. This is what happens when you legalize a commodity. Small growers get bought out. Dispensaries become chains. Marketing becomes sophisticated. Products become engineered. You can buy cannabis in forms your ancestors couldn't imagine: edibles, vaporizers, concentrates, tinctures, topicals, beverages. This content climbs. The joints of the 1960s contained maybe 5% the C. Modern concentrates hit 90%. This is the iron law again. Consumers want potency. Markets provide it. Some people develop problems with high-potency cannabis. Daily use, dependence, difficulty stopping. Cannabis use disorder is real, less severe than alcohol or opiates, but real nonetheless. Roughly 9% of cannabis users develop it. That's millions of people. Legalization makes treatment more accessible, because people can admit they're using without fear of prosecution, but it also normalizes use in ways that might increase problematic consumption. These are trade-offs. Everything is trade-offs. No policy is perfect. The question is whether the harms of legalization exceed the harms of prohibition. The evidence suggests they don't. Psychedelics are having their second wave. The research that stopped in the 1970s resumes in the 2000s. Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, UCLA. Rigorous studies, randomized controlled trials. Psilocybin for depression. MDMA for PAST. Ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. The results are remarkable. Single doses producing sustained improvements. Months of benefit from one experience. Success rates exceeding traditional treatments. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening because traditional treatments aren't working well enough. Antidepressants work for maybe 60% of people. The other 40% cycle through medications, trying to find something that helps, accumulating side effects, losing hope. The mental health crisis is real. Suicide rates are rising. Depression is epidemic. Anxiety is ubiquitous. The existing tools aren't sufficient. Something new is necessary. Psychedelic therapy isn't just taking a drug. It's a structured experience. Preparation sessions. The dosing session with therapists present. Integration sessions afterward. The psychedelic experience itself might be therapeutic, or it might just be the catalyst. The thing that breaks rigid thought patterns and allows change. Nobody's entirely certain how it works. The brain on psychedelics shows increased connectivity, decreased activity in the default mode network, neuroplasticity. These are mechanisms, not explanations. The phenomenology matters. People describe ego dissolution, mystical experiences, confronting trauma, feeling connected to everything. These experiences correlate with therapeutic outcomes. Oregon legalizes psilocybin therapy in 2020. Colorado follows in 2022. This isn't full legalization. It's medicalization. Licensed facilitators, controlled settings. Therapeutic frameworks. This is psychedelics being brought back into the fold, carefully, with guardrails, with institutional oversight. The counterculture psychedelics of the 1960s were about recreation, rebellion, consciousness expansion as a political act. The psychedelics of the 2020s are about trauma recovery, treating veterans, helping the dying face death with less terror. Same compounds. Different context, different outcomes. But recreational use continues, always has, always will. The festival scene, the rave scene, the club scene. Munma at raves isn't going away, because some therapist somewhere is using it to treat Pete's. These parallel tracks will continue. Medical psychedelics, recreational psychedelics, spiritual psychedelics. The substance doesn't determine the use, the context does, the intention does. A mushroom trip at a psytrance festival in the desert is not the same experience as a mushroom trip in a clinic with two therapists monitoring your vital signs. Same drug, different set, different setting, different everything. You're born into a world drowning in stimulants. Add diagnoses are climbing. Whether this represents better recognition of a real condition or medicalization of normal childhood behavior is hotly debated. Either way, millions of children take amphetamines daily, Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin. These are Schedule I controlled substances. These are essentially medical methamphetamine. They work, they improve focus, they reduce impulsivity. They allow children who couldn't sit still in class to sit still in class, which is either treating a neurological disorder or enforcing conformity, depending on your perspective. Possibly both. The same stimulants are used recreationally. College students cramming for exams. Professionals meeting deadlines. Anyone who wants enhanced focus and happens to know someone with a prescription, they're willing to share. The line between medical and recreational use is porous. The person taking Adderall as prescribed for added is medicating. The person taking the same dose of the same drug to finish a project is enhancing. The pharmacology is identical. The framing differs. Stimulant use disorder exists. You can become dependent on amphetamines. You can develop tolerance. You can crash hard when you stop. The come down is brutal depression, fatigue, and hedonia, the sense that nothing will ever feel good again. This passes, but while you're in it, it feels permanent. The temptation to take more, to avoid the crash, is powerful. Some people cycle this way for years. Prescribed stimulants to enhanced doses, to street drugs, to methamphetamine, which is the same drug but stronger and stigmatized and illegal, unless a doctor prescribes it as desoxine, which some do, rarely, proving once again that the difference between medicine and drugs is entirely contextual. Methamphetamine is its own crisis, smaller than opiates but devastating to the communities it touches. Rural America especially. Meth is cheap. Meth is potent. Meth keeps you awake for days. Meth makes you feel invincible until it destroys your teeth, your skin, your relationships, your mind. Meth psychosis is real paranoia, hallucinations. Convinced people are following you, that there are cameras in the walls, that everyone's plotting against you. This can last for months after you stop using. The brain heals slowly if it heals at all. The response to meth is the same as the response to every other drug: criminalization, punishment, moral condemnation. It doesn't work. It never works. Meth users need treatment, housing, support, mental health care, dental care, hope. They get jail. They get criminal records. They get released with nothing. They use again. The cycle repeats. Recidivism rates are staggering because the underlying conditions haven't changed. Poverty, trauma, hopelessness, pain. Meth treats these temporarily. Sobriety without addressing them is just returning to the unbearable baseline that made drugs appealing in the first place. You inherit a pharmaceutical industry that caused an epidemic and faced minimal consequences. The Sackler family, owners of Purdue Pharma, made billions from OxyContin. They knew it was addictive. Internal documents prove this. They marketed it anyway. They lied to doctors. They lied to regulators. They lied to patients. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy. The Sacklers paid fines and kept most of their money. Some individuals faced charges. Nobody went to prison for any significant time. The message is clear. You can kill hundreds of thousands of people with drugs if you do it legally, through a corporation, with marketing materials and lobbyists. The same industry that created the opioid epidemic is now interested in psychedelics. Pharmaceutical companies are patenting molecules, conducting trials, preparing for FDA approval. This is predictable. This is capitalism. Psychedelic therapy will be expensive. It will be inaccessible to most people who need it. Insurance might cover some of it eventually, maybe. If the data is sufficiently compelling and the lobbying is sufficiently aggressive, the underground will continue. The facilitators without licenses. The people growing mushrooms in their closets. The circles gathering to trip together because they can't afford therapy. And the healing happens anyway. Messier, riskier, but happening. You're born into a culture that's simultaneously more accepting and more anxious about drugs than any previous generation. Cannabis is increasingly normalized. Psychedelics are having a renaissance. Microdosing is a trend. Optimization culture meets consciousness alteration. You don't take loss to see God anymore. You take 1/10 of a dose to be slightly more creative at work. You don't take mushrooms to dissolve your ego. You take a threshold dose to improve your mood, your focus, your productivity. This is drugs in service of capitalism. This is better living through chemistry. This is the complete inversion of the 1960s countercultural vision. Instead of dropping out, you're microdosing to work harder. Whether this is good or bad is unclear. People report benefits, better mood, more creativity, improved relationships. The research is limited. Most microdosing studies rely on self-reports. Placebo effects are powerful. The subjective improvements might be real regardless of mechanism, or they might be entirely placebo. Or placebo might not matter if people feel better. The philosophy of microdosing is pragmatic. Whatever works, whatever helps, whatever makes late capitalism slightly more bearable. Social media amplifies everything. Drug culture used to be local, subcultural, shared in specific spaces with specific people. Now it's global and public. Reddit has communities for every substance. Erowid hosts thousands of trip reports. YouTube has harm reduction channels. TikTok has when drug check. Information is everywhere. Misinformation is everywhere. Teenagers learn about drugs from the internet. They learn proper dosing. They learn to test their substances. They also learn misinformation, bro science, dangerous combinations. The democratization of drug knowledge is both harm reduction and harm proliferation. The language around drugs is changing. Substance use disorder instead of addiction. People who use drugs instead of addicts or junkies. Person first language. This matters. Language shapes perception. Perception shapes policy. Calling someone an addict defines them by their drug use. Calling them a person who uses drugs acknowledges their humanity first. This seems minor. It's not minor. Stigma kills. Stigma prevents people from seeking help. Destigmatization saves lives. Harm reduction becomes mainstream, slowly, against fierce opposition. Needle exchanges, safe consumption sites, drug testing at festivals, naloxone distribution, fentanyl test strips. These interventions reduce deaths. They reduce disease transmission. They reduce suffering. They don't reduce drug use. which is why prohibitionists oppose them. The goal isn't health. The goal is abstinence. Anything that makes drug use safer is seen as enabling, as condoning, as giving up on the moral crusade. This perspective kills people. It kills them in large numbers. It kills them predictably. Harm reduction advocates point this out repeatedly. The opposition continues anyway. You inherit a world where the dark web sells drugs. Silk Road launches in 2011, shuts down in 2013. Dozens of successor markets emerge. You can buy anything. Lust, Myanmar, cocaine, heroin, prescription pills, research chemicals. Cryptocurrency makes it possible. Encryption makes it safer. Feedback systems create market accountability. Vendors with good reviews survive. Vendors who scam get banned. It's drug dealing with Amazon's business model. This terrifies law enforcement, which raids markets periodically. Arrests administrators, seizes servers. New markets appear immediately. You cannot shut down a decentralized network. You can only drive it deeper underground. Dark web markets reduce some harms and create others. The drugs are often higher quality than street drugs. Vendors care about reputation. They test their products. They're honest about contents and dosage. Overdose risk decreases, but you're still buying drugs on the internet. The mail isn't perfectly secure. Packages get intercepted. People get arrested. The transaction is documented forever on the blockchain. Law enforcement adapts. They infiltrate markets. They track Bitcoin transactions. They wait, monitor, and then strike all at once in coordinated international raids. The darknet weed out dangerous vendors better than street markets ever could. Someone sells fentanyl, laced heroin. Negative reviews destroy their reputation. They can't sell anymore. They have to close shop and start over. Building trust from zero. This is market-based harm reduction. This is anarcho-capitalism solving a problem the state created through prohibition. The irony is delicious. The drug war forced drugs online, and online markets are safer than street markets in specific measurable ways. Research chemicals flood the market. Synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic cathinones, novel psychedelics. These are designed molecules. Chemically similar to illegal drugs, but technically legal, because they're not specifically scheduled. Chemists stay one step ahead of legislation. A compound gets banned. They modify the molecular structure slightly. New compound legally distinct, functionally similar. This is the whack-a-mole problem. You cannot ban your way out of chemistry. The number of possible psychoactive molecules is functionally infinite. Research chemicals are dangerous because they're unstudied. No safety data, no dosage information, no understanding of long-term effects. People volunteer as guinea pigs. They take unknown doses of unknown substances and report what happens. Trip reports as crowd-sourced pharmacology. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes people die. Synthetic cannabinoids especially, K2, Spice, whatever the current branding is. They're nothing like cannabis. They're full agonists at cannabinoid receptors, which means they activate them completely instead of partially, which means the effects are unpredictable and sometimes catastrophic. Seizures, psychosis, death. But they're legal or were legal, or are legal in specific jurisdictions. And people keep using them because they don't show up on drug tests, or because they're curious, or because real cannabis is unavailable. You're born into a generation facing unprecedented mental health challenges. Anxiety rates climbing, depression rates climbing, suicide rates climbing, especially among adolescents. The causes are debated: social media, economic precarity, climate anxiety, political polarization, the collapse of stable institutions, the sense that the future is foreclosed. All of these probably contribute. Regardless of cause, the suffering is real, and people are seeking solutions. Some turn to therapy, some turn to medication, some turn to both, some turn to drugs. Not as treatment, but as self-medication, which is what humans have always done, which is what most drug use has always been. An attempt to feel different, to feel better, to escape the unbearable now. The line between use and abuse is context-dependent. Drinking to unwind after work is normal. Drinking to not feel anything is concerning. Smoking weed recreationally is fine. Smoking weed all day every day to avoid confronting your problems is avoidance. But these lines are blurry, they're subjective. They're easy to rationalize away when you're the one doing the rationalizing. Problematic drug use correlates with trauma, with untreated mental illness, with adverse childhood experiences. The ACE studies are clear: the more childhood trauma you experience, the more likely you are to develop substance use disorders. This isn't moral weakness. This isn't poor choices. This is the brain trying to cope with pain it doesn't have better tools to process. Drugs work, temporarily, which is why people keep using them despite devastating consequences. Opiates make emotional pain stop. Alcohol makes anxiety stop. Stimulants make depression stop. These effects are real. They're just not sustainable. The solution isn't more enforcement. The solution is addressing trauma, treating mental illness, providing economic security, building communities, giving people reasons to stay sober that are more compelling than the temporary relief drugs provide. This is hard. This is expensive. This requires societal restructuring. It's easier to blame individuals, to criminalize, to moralize, to maintain the status quo while wondering why nothing improves. You inherit medication-assisted treatment as the standard of care for opiate use disorder. Methadone, buprenorphine, these are opiates themselves. They prevent withdrawal. They reduce cravings. They allow people to function. They're not abstinence, which bothers people who think sobriety is the only acceptable outcome, but they're effective. They reduce mortality. They reduce crime. They improve quality of life. The research is unambiguous, and yet access is limited. Methadone clinics are regulated intensely. You have to show up every day, sometimes multiple times a day. You're monitored. You're drug tested. You're treated with suspicion. The message is that even when you're trying to recover, you can't be trusted. Buprenorphine is better. You can take it at home. You can get a month's supply. But not every doctor prescribes it. You need special training, a special license, special DEA waivers. These restrictions are lifting slowly, but they've limited access for decades. People who wanted treatment couldn't get it because there were no providers nearby, because the wait lists were months long, because the system makes it as difficult as possible to receive care while using the language of helping. Antagonist-based treatments exist too. Naltrexone blocks opiate receptors. You can't get high if you take it. This works for some people, mostly people who weren't that severely dependent to begin with. For people with severe opiate use disorder, naltrexone is misery. You're blocking the only thing that made life tolerable. The dysphoria is intense. Most people stop taking it. Compliance rates are terrible, but it's abstinence adjacent, which makes it philosophically appealing to people who think medication. Assisted treatment is just substituting one drug for another. They're right. You are substituting one drug for another. You're substituting a dangerous, illegal, inconsistent drug for a legal, regulated, consistent one. You're substituting a drug that destroys your life for a drug that allows you to maintain employment, relationships, and housing. This is called progress. This is harm reduction. The goal isn't purity. The goal is survival, stability, and maybe eventually, when the person is ready, cessation. But maybe not. Maybe they stay on medication indefinitely. Maybe that's fine. Diabetics take insulin their entire lives. Nobody frames that as moral failure. You're born into the cannabis legalization debate, discovering new nuances. Legal states are generating data. Emergency room visits for cannabis hyperemesis syndrome increase. This is a real condition, cyclic vomiting triggered by heavy chronic cannabis use, treated paradoxically by hot showers, resolved by stopping cannabis use entirely. Nobody knew this existed 20 years ago. Now it's documented. The mechanism is unclear. The suffering is real. This is what happens when millions of people use a drug openly. Rare side effects become visible. Driving under the influence of cannabis is a problem without good solutions. The C in the bloodstream doesn't correlate with impairment the way blood alcohol does. You can test positive for the weeks after your last use, long after any impairment has faded. Roadside sobriety tests are subjective. Measuring actual impairment is difficult. Some states set the C-blood limits anyway, which catches medical users, daily users, anyone with tolerance. Other states rely on officer discretion, which introduces bias. There's no good answer yet. Legal cannabis creates problems we're still learning to solve. Cannabis use disorder treatment exists, but is underutilized. Most people with problematic cannabis use don't seek treatment. It's seen as a minor drug. The stigma of admitting you can't stop using weed is significant. It's just weed. It's not like you're shooting heroin. Except you're using it compulsively despite negative consequences, which is the definition of substance use disorder. And the substance being less harmful than heroin doesn't mean you're not struggling. Treatment for cannabis use disorder is mostly therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational enhancement, contingency management. No medications are approved specifically for it. Some people use synthetic the analogs to taper, which is harm reduction, but not abstinence. Success rates are modest. Many people relapse. Many people decide they prefer using. Many people achieve moderation, using occasionally instead of daily. The outcomes vary because no single intervention works for everyone. You inherit the normalization of performance enhancement, nootropics, smart drugs, modafinil to stay awake, various racetams to improve memory, caffeine and L-theanine stacks. This is drug use as optimization. You're not trying to feel different. You're trying to be better, smarter, faster, more productive, more competitive. Silicon Valley runs on this. Finance runs on this. Academia runs on this. Everywhere there's intense competition, there's chemical assistance. The ethics are debated. Is it cheating? Is it the future? Is it leveling the playing field or creating a chemical arms race? If everyone's enhancing, does anyone really gain an advantage? Or are we just collectively working harder for the same outcomes? These questions don't have clear answers. The use continues regardless. Competitive pressure overwhelms ethical qualms. You enhance or you fall behind. Maybe enhancement should be regulated. Maybe it should be provided equitably, so those who can't afford it aren't disadvantaged. Or maybe it shouldn't be allowed at all. Good luck enforcing that. Caffeine is the world's most widely consumed psychoactive drug. Billions of people use it daily. It's in coffee, tea, energy drinks, soda, pills, gum. It's given to children in soda. It's normal. It's expected. Not using caffeine is the deviation. Try explaining to your workplace that you don't drink coffee and watch the confusion. Caffeine is a stimulant. It's addictive. Withdrawal causes headaches, fatigue, irritability. But it's legal, cheap, and culturally embedded. Coffee shops are third spaces. Tea ceremonies are cultural traditions. Energy drinks sponsor sports. Caffeine isn't questioned, because questioning it would require questioning a fundamental aspect of modern life. The expectation of constant alertness, constant productivity, constant availability. You're born into a world where nearly everyone is on drugs, but only some drugs count as drugs. Coffee isn't a drug. Prescription medication isn't a drug unless you're taking it recreationally. Alcohol isn't really a drug either, at least not in normal conversation. Drugs are illicit substances used by bad people making bad choices. This framing is propaganda. This framing serves specific interests. Caffeine, alcohol, and prescription medications are drugs. They alter consciousness. They have effects. They have side effects. They can be misused. The distinction between them and illegal drugs is legal, not pharmacological. Nicotine is losing its grip, slowly. Smoking rates decline. Vaping replaces cigarettes. Vaping is harm reduction nicotine without combustion, without tar, without most of the carcinogens. Public health is conflicted. Vaping gets people off cigarettes, which is good. Vaping also attracts teenagers who wouldn't have smoked, which is bad. Juul becomes a phenomenon. Teenagers vape in school bathrooms. Nic salts deliver higher doses faster. Addiction rates among adolescents climb. The pendulum swings. Regulations tighten. Flavors get banned. The intention is preventing youth use. The effect is driving adult users back to cigarettes or to the black market. where vitamin E acetate in the C cartridges kills people. The vaping crisis of 2019 kills dozens. Hundreds are hospitalized with lung injuries. The media blames nicotine vaping. The cause is actually vitamin E acetate in black market the C cartridges, used as a cutting agent because it looks like cannabis oil. This is prohibition's fault. If cannabis were legal and regulated, nobody would be adding random chemicals to cartridges. Testing would be mandatory. People wouldn't die. Instead, they die. And the media blames the wrong thing, and millions of people get confused about what's actually dangerous. Tobacco harm reduction is real. Snus, nicotine pouches, heated tobacco products. These deliver nicotine without combustion. They're popular in Sweden. Sweden has the lowest smoking rates and lowest lung cancer rates in Europe. Correlation isn't causation, but the correlation is suggestive. Nicotine itself isn't particularly harmful. It's addictive, but addiction without catastrophic health consequences is manageable. Cigarettes kill because of combustion. Remove combustion, reduce harm. This is obvious. It's also controversial because some public health advocates believe any nicotine use is unacceptable, that harm reduction enables addiction. This perspective prioritizes purity over pragmatism. It costs lives. You're born into a world grappling with digital addiction, which is like drug addiction except the substance is information, social media, video games, pornography. The dopamine hits are real. The compulsion is real. The negative consequences are real. People neglect relationships, work, health. They can't stop scrolling. They check their phone hundreds of times per day. Variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Built into every app. Whether behavioral addictions are equivalent to substance addictions is debated. The brain imaging looks similar. The subjective experience is similar. The treatment approaches are similar. But there's no chemical dependence, no withdrawal in the physical sense. You can't die from social media withdrawal. You just feel anxious, uncomfortable, missing out. Maybe that's sufficient. Maybe addiction is about compulsive behavior despite negative consequences, regardless of mechanism. Or maybe we're pathologizing normal behavior in the digital age. Maybe everyone's on their phone constantly, because that's where everything happens now. Work, relationships, entertainment, information, existence. Limiting screen time is the new just say no. It's presented as simple. It's not simple. Your phone is how you stay connected. Your phone is how you work. Your phone is how you entertain yourself. Putting it down means disconnecting from everyone and everything. This is socially costly. This is professionally costly. Recommending it without acknowledging the cost is useless. People need their phones. They also need to not be controlled by their phones. Balancing these is the challenge nobody solved. Gaming addiction becomes officially recognized. The WHO includes gaming disorder in the ICD-11. This legitimizes it as a real problem. It also opens the door to pathologizing any immersive hobby. Reading was once considered dangerous, especially for women. Novels were going to corrupt minds, prevent people from functioning in reality. We laugh at that now. Maybe we'll laugh at gaming disorder panic later. Or maybe we won't because gaming genuinely is designed to be addictive. With loot boxes functioning as slot machines, with daily rewards requiring login, with social pressure to play with friends. The industry profits from compulsion. The industry engineers compulsion. Regulatory pushback is minimal. You inherit a pharmaceutical industry that's endlessly creative in finding new applications for old drugs. Ketamine for depression. It works fast. It works when other antidepressants fail. Ketamine clinics proliferate. You can get intravenous ketamine infusions for treatment, resistant depression. You can get intranasal esketamine, the prescription version. Insurance might cover it. Probably not. Ketamine therapy costs thousands. It's another treatment available to those who can afford it, inaccessible to those who can't, which is most people with severe depression. Ketamine is also a party drug. Special K dissociation, the K-hole. People take it recreationally, have for decades. The therapeutic use and recreational use happen in parallel, creating confusion. Is ketamine medicine or drugs? Both. Always both. The dose differs. The setting differs. The intention differs. The molecule doesn't care. It produces effects. How those effects are framed and contextualized determines whether it's treatment or recreation. Psychedelic therapy is expensive. Prohibitively expensive. A course of MDMA, assisted psychotherapy for PATES costs tens of thousands of dollars. Insurance doesn't cover it yet. Maybe eventually. Psilocybin therapy in Oregon costs several thousand for a session. This creates a two-tiered system. Wealthy people get legal therapeutic psychedelics with medical supervision. Everyone else gets whatever they can find, takes it wherever they can take it, processes it however they can process it. This is class-based healthcare. This is American healthcare. Nothing new. The underground continues. The facilitators, the guides, the shamans, the people offering ceremonies in houses and retreats and forests. Some are legitimate, trained, careful. Some are predators. Sexual abuse in psychedelic spaces is real, is documented, is discussed because the community is protective, because prosecution is difficult when the activity itself is illegal. Vulnerable people in altered states are at risk. Power dynamics are real. Consent is complicated when you're not entirely in consensus reality. Integration matters. The experience itself isn't sufficient. You have to process it. Make sense of it, incorporate the insights into your life. Without integration, psychedelic experiences are just weird memories, maybe entertaining, maybe disturbing, but not transformative. Integration requires time, reflection, often therapy. The psychedelic movement emphasizes this. Set and setting and integration. The substance is just the catalyst. The work happens before and after. You're born into a culture of self-optimization that's exhausting. Biohacking, life extension, performance enhancement, supplement stacks. Every aspect of human experience is something to be improved, optimized, quantified. You track your sleep. You track your steps. You track your heart rate variability. You adjust your behavior based on data. You're a system to be tweaked. This is scientific. This is also dehumanizing. You're not a problem to be solved. You're a person living a life. But the culture suggests otherwise. The culture suggests you're never enough as you are. You could be better. You should be better. Here's a supplement for that. Here's a drug for that. Here's a protocol for that. The supplement industry is unregulated chaos. The FDA doesn't approve supplements. Manufacturers can claim almost anything. The contents might not match the label. The dose might be wrong. Contaminants are common. Heavy metals. Bacteria. Undeclared pharmaceutical ingredients. People take supplements thinking they're safe because they're natural. Natural doesn't mean safe. Hemlock is natural. Arsenic is natural. The naturalistic fallacy kills people who trust it. Nootropics especially are suspect. Racetams, the popular class of cognitive enhancers, have minimal human research. Anecdotes proliferate. People claim benefits. Maybe placebo. Maybe real. The mechanisms are speculative. You're essentially experimenting on yourself based on Reddit posts and blog articles. Some people find this exciting. Some people suffer adverse effects and can't figure out why, because they're taking 12 different substances and have no idea which one is causing problems. You inherit polypharmacy as standard practice. People take multiple prescription medications. People take multiple supplements. People consume caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, cannabis. Drug interactions are complex. Doctors often don't know what supplements you're taking because you don't think to mention them, because they're not real drugs, except they interact with real drugs, sometimes dangerously. The serotonin syndrome risk from combining antidepressants with certain supplements or drugs is real. People end up in emergency rooms. People die. The internet has information about interactions, but you have to know to look, and you have to trust the source, and misinformation is abundant. The opioid epidemic continues evolving. Fentanyl dominates. Xylazine appears in the supply. It's a veterinary sedative used to tranquilize horses. It's not an opioid. Naloxone doesn't reverse it. It causes wounds, horrible wounds that don't heal. People injecting xylazine, Contaminated heroin develop necrotic tissue, sometimes requiring amputation. This is prohibition's fault. Nobody's adding xylazine because they want to. They're adding it because it's cheap, because it extends the opioid high, because the goal is profit, not purity. Regulated drugs don't contain veterinary sedatives. Illegal drugs contain whatever the manufacturer decides to add. Medication diversion is common. People sell their prescriptions. People share prescriptions. Your friend has anxiety medication. You have anxiety. They give you some of theirs. This is technically illegal. This is also how people access medications they need, but can't afford or can't get through official channels. The healthcare system is failing them. Informal networks compensate. This creates risks: wrong dosage, wrong medication, interactions, dependence. But for people without insurance, without access to doctors, it's often the only option. You're born into the Instagram drug culture. Aestheticized drug use, perfectly arranged lines on mirrors, artistic photos of mushrooms, vaporwave edits of pills, drugs as aesthetic, as vibe, as content. This trivializes harm. This glamorizes risk. Young people see only the aesthetic, not the consequences. They don't see the overdoses, the addiction, the psychosis. They see the carefully curated moments, the euphoria, the visuals, the experience. Social media shows you what people want you to see. Nobody posts their rock bottom. Nobody posts withdrawals. Nobody posts psychotic breaks. The algorithm doesn't reward that content. Influencer culture meets drugs. People build followings discussing their drug use. Harm reduction influencers provide valuable information. They teach testing, dosing, safety. They normalize talking about drugs honestly. But recreational use influencers also exist. They make content about getting high. They review drugs like they're restaurants. This walks a line. Education and glorification blur together. Teenagers watch. Teenagers imitate. Some people argue this openness is good, that honesty is better than silence. Others argue it encourages use. Both are probably right. The effects are complex, contradictory, impossible to reduce to simple good or bad. Drug memes proliferate. Depression memes about self-medicating. Ad memes about stimulants. Anxiety memes about benzos. This is coping through humor. This is making the unbearable shareable. This is community formation around shared struggles. But it's also normalization. When everyone jokes about needing Xanax, actually needing Xanax becomes invisible. When everyone jokes about Adderall to function, addiction hiding in plain sight becomes harder to identify. The memes are funny because they're true. They're concerning because they're true. You inherit online pharmacies, some legitimate, most not. Websites claiming to sell prescription medications without prescriptions. They're usually selling counterfeit pills, pressed in facilities with no quality control, containing unknown quantities of active ingredients, sometimes containing entirely different drugs. People buy antibiotics, pain medication, erectile dysfunction drugs, weight loss drugs, psychiatric medications. Some people have no choice. American healthcare is expensive. Insurance is expensive. Even with insurance, medications are expensive. People ration insulin. People skip doses. People turn to online pharmacies because they can't afford legitimate ones. The fake pills look real. The websites look professional. The prices are suspiciously good. People know this is risky. They do it anyway because the alternative is suffering without medication. Some get lucky. Some get scammed. Some get poisoned. The legitimate online pharmacies exist, mostly Canadian, exploiting price differentials. They're technically illegal, but largely tolerated, because preventing Americans from accessing affordable medication from Canada would be politically unpopular. The whole situation is absurd. The richest country in the world has citizens buying medications from abroad because domestic prices are exploitative. You're born into the benzos crisis that nobody talks about. Benzodiazepines for anxiety, for panic, for sleep. Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, Valium. They're prescribed freely, more freely than they should be. They work immediately. You take Xanax and 30 minutes later your anxiety is gone. This seems like a miracle. It is a miracle until you develop dependence. which happens faster than anyone tells you, which happens to everyone who takes them regularly for more than a few weeks. Benzos dependence is worse than opiate dependence in some ways. Opiate withdrawal is miserable but not dangerous. Benzo withdrawal can kill you. Seizures, hallucinations, dissociation. Withdrawal can last months, even years. Protracted withdrawal symptoms, anxiety worse than baseline, insomnia, depersonalization, the sense that nothing is real and never will be again. Tapering is necessary and takes forever, months to years, reducing slowly to avoid seizures. Many doctors don't know this. They prescribe benzos long-term, then suddenly cut people off. People seize. People die. This is medical malpractice happening routinely. The benzo crisis is invisible because it's prescription drugs, because the people dependent are often middle-aged women with anxiety disorders, because the medical establishment caused it and doesn't want to acknowledge responsibility. Street benzos are also everywhere. Pressed Xanax bars, fluoprazolam and clonazepam. Research chemical benzos more potent than the originals, appearing in pressed pills sold as Xanax. People black out. People lose days. People commit crimes they don't remember. Benzo amnesia is real. You're awake. You're walking around. You're doing things, but you're not forming memories. The next day is blank. Mixing benzos with alcohol is lethal. Both are CNs, depressants. Respiratory depression. You stop breathing in your sleep. This kills people regularly. The warnings are everywhere. People do it anyway. Sometimes deliberately for the increased effect. Sometimes accidentally, because they're already intoxicated and their judgment is impaired. The body count is significant. The response is inadequate. You inherit a world where psychedelics are being studied for everything. Depression, anxiety, petite ulce, anorexia, addiction. The results are promising across diagnoses. This suggests psychedelics aren't working on specific symptoms, but on something underlying: psychological flexibility, the ability to change patterns, neuroplasticity. This is exciting. This is also concerning because it suggests we don't really understand the mechanisms. We're using these compounds empirically, they work. We don't know exactly why. We'll figure out the details later. The risk is over-promising. Psychedelics are being presented as miracle cures. They're not. They're tools. Useful tools for some people in some contexts. Not everyone benefits. Some people have neutral experiences. Some people have traumatic experiences. Bad trips are real. People have psychotic breaks. People with latent psychiatric vulnerabilities can have those vulnerabilities activated. Family history of schizophrenia and psychedelics don't mix. The community sometimes downplays this because enthusiasm and caution are difficult to balance. Integration is commercializing. Integration coaches, integration therapists, integration retreats. Some are helpful, some are exploitative. Charging thousands of dollars to help someone process a mushroom trip is a business model. It might be a necessary service. It's definitely expensive. As psychedelics become legal, an entire industry will form around them: growers, manufacturers, therapists, facilitators, coaches, retreat centers. This is inevitable. This is capitalism. The question is whether it will remain accessible or become another wellness luxury available only to the wealthy. Indigenous medicine is being appropriated and commodified. Ayahuasca tourism. People fly to Peru for ceremonies. Some facilitators are legitimate curanderos. Many are entrepreneurs capitalizing on Western interest. The traditional context is stripped. The spiritual framework is simplified for Western consumption. Indigenous communities see their medicines taken, commercialized, stripped of context, and sold back to them at prices they can't afford. This is colonialism again. Different century, same pattern. Biopiracy is real. Companies patent traditional medicines. They patent molecules from plants indigenous peoples have used for centuries. They profit from knowledge they didn't generate. Legal challenges exist, but are expensive. Corporations have resources indigenous communities don't. Patents get enforced. Traditional users suddenly need permission or payment to use medicines their ancestors used freely. The injustice is blatant. The practice continues. You're born into the deemed renaissance. DMT, the most intense psychedelic, the spirit molecule, the drug that produces experiences indistinguishable from profound mysticism or alien contact, depending on your framework. It lasts 15 minutes. You're back to baseline in 30. This makes it appealing, profound experiences without significant time commitment. DMT can be smoked, vaporized, or taken orally with an mai, as in ayahuasca. DMT entities are reported consistently across users. Machine elves, beings, presences. Something that feels intelligent, communicative, separate from your own mind. These experiences are phenomenologically real. Whether the entities are actual non-human intelligences, autonomous complexes from the unconscious, or elaborate hallucinations is debated passionately and probably can't be resolved empirically. The people experiencing them often come away convinced they've contacted something real. This shapes their worldview, their spirituality, their understanding of consciousness. Deemed research is limited but growing. Rick Strassman's studies in the 1990s documented experiences. Newer research focuses on therapeutic applications, brain imaging, understanding mechanisms. The Imperial College Group maps brain activity during trips. Connectivity increases dramatically. The default mode network shuts down. This correlates with ego dissolution. People report feeling like they've died, like they've left their body, like they've accessed something fundamental about reality. These reports are consistent across cultures, across history. Terence McKenna built a philosophy around DMT. Joe Rogan won't shut up about it. This is both helpful and harmful. Helpful because it normalizes discussing profound experiences. Harmful because it trivializes them, reduces them to entertainment, to podcast content. You inherit a world where microdosing is mainstream among certain demographics. Silicon Valley especially. Tech workers dose lost or mushrooms every 3 days, sub-perceptual amounts, just enough to maybe improve cognition without obvious intoxication. Studies on this are mixed. Some show benefits, some show placebo. The subjective reports are positive. People claim creativity, productivity, mood improvements. Whether it's real or expectancy is almost irrelevant if people feel better. But long-term effects are unknown. You're taking psychedelics regularly for years. What does that do? Nobody knows. The users are the experiment. The risk is cardiac. Psychedelics are 5-HT2B agonists. Chronic agonism of this receptor causes heart valve damage. This is why fenfluramine was pulled from the market. Whether microdosing causes similar damage is unknown. The doses are much lower. The exposure is chronic, theoretically concerning. No concrete evidence yet. But by the time evidence appears, thousands of people will have been microdosing for years. They're guinea pigs. They're volunteering for this. Informed consent is difficult when the information doesn't exist yet. You're born into a culture war over drugs. The progressive position decriminalization, harm reduction, treating addiction as a health issue. The conservative position enforcement, punishment. Just say no. These positions correlate with broader political identities. Drugs become tribal markers. Your stance on drug policy signals your tribe. This prevents rational discussion. Everything becomes identity politics. The evidence doesn't matter when the position is tribal. Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001. Possession for personal use is an administrative offense, not criminal. People caught with drugs meet with social workers, not judges. Treatment is available. Criminal penalties are gone. The results? HIV infections decreased dramatically. Overdose deaths decreased. Drug use rates similar to rest of Europe. This is the model that works. This is evidence-based policy. It's politically difficult to implement elsewhere because decriminalization sounds like legalization, sounds like condoning drug use, sounds like moral failure. Oregon decriminalizes small amounts of all drugs in 2020. The results are mixed. Drug use doesn't spike, but the promised treatment infrastructure doesn't materialize. Money is allocated, but systems take time to build. People interpret this as failure. They demand recriminalization. The experiment is abandoned before it's really begun. Change takes time. Political patience is limited. Building treatment capacity, training workers, Establishing programs requires years. Politicians want results immediately. Immediate results are impossible. The cycle repeats. You inherit synthetic opioids beyond fentanyl. Carfentanil, so potent that touching it can kill you, manufactured by Chinese labs, appearing in drug supplies. Isotonitazine, etonitazine, metonitazine, designer opioids scheduled as they appear. New ones synthesized immediately. The chemists are ahead of legislation indefinitely. Each new compound is stronger than the last. This is the iron law again. Prohibition incentivizes potency. Powder cocaine became crack. Heroin became fentanyl. Fentanyl becomes analogs that require micrograms to be active. The harm escalates. The profits increase. The policy doesn't change. Nitazines are appearing in drug supplies. In Canada, in Australia. Anywhere fentanyl appeared first, netazines follow eventually. Harm reduction organizations test drugs for free. They publish results. They warn users. This saves lives. It doesn't stop use because addiction doesn't stop because warnings exist. People know it's dangerous. They use anyway. Compulsion overrides rationality. The brain's reward circuitry has been hijacked. The prefrontal cortex is screaming warnings. The midbrain doesn't care. You're born into a world where psychedelic therapy might be approved soon. Mundamofapest is closest. The MAPS Phase 3 trials showed efficacy. FDA approval seems likely. This will revolutionize trauma treatment or become another expensive niche therapy, depending on implementation, access, insurance coverage. Psilocybin for depression is advancing. FDA breakthrough therapy designation. Clinical trials ongoing. Results are positive. Approval is probably years away but conceivable. When psychedelics become prescription medications, everything changes and nothing changes. Changes. Legitimate research, medical access, reduced stigma. Doesn't change. Recreational use continues. Underground continues. Prohibition continues for non-medical use. The two tracks diverge further. Medical psychedelics become respectable. Recreational psychedelics remain deviant. The same substance, different contexts, different legal status. Hypocrisy but also pragmatism. Society accepts medical use before recreational use. Cannabis followed this pattern. Psychedelics will too. The patent issues are contentious. Companies are patenting specific methods, specific formulations, specific protocols. You can't patent psilocybin, but you can patent synthetic psilocybin. Delivery methods, therapy protocols. This allows profit extraction from compounds that exist in nature, that indigenous peoples have used freely. The moral problems are obvious. The legal framework allows it. Esona Institute is trying to make psilocybin available generically, but most companies are protecting intellectual property aggressively. The future of psychedelic medicine might be corporate, controlled, expensive, and inaccessible. You inherit the continued existence of datura, the deliriant nobody should ever take, but people take anyway. Datura, brugmansia, jimsonweed, plants containing tropane alkaloids, scopolamine, atropine, hyoscyamin. These don't produce euphoria, they produce delirium, true delirium. You can't tell what's real. You're having conversations with people who aren't there. You're smoking cigarettes that don't exist. You're completely disconnected from reality for hours or days. The experience is terrifying. People end up in hospitals. People die from overdose, from accidents while delirious, from doing things they wouldn't do if they understood what was happening. Why do people take datura? Mostly teenagers. Mostly curiosity, mostly because they heard it's a drug and didn't research what kind. Trip reports online are uniformly horrific. Worst experience of my life. Never again. Thought I was dying, still people try it. The plant grows wild. It's available. It's free. Teenagers see psychoactive plant and don't distinguish between psychedelics and deliriants. They learn the hard way. Some don't survive the learning. You're born into the age of euthanasia drugs. Nembutal, pentobarbital, barbiturates that cause peaceful death. Assisted suicide is legal in some jurisdictions. People obtain these drugs through legal means where available, through underground means elsewhere. Right to die movements argue for death with dignity. Opposition argues sanctity of life. The debate is ethical, religious, political. Access to peaceful death is a strange kind of drug issue drugs, not for healing or recreation or alteration, but for ending, for choosing your exit. The black market supplies people who can't access legal means. The quality is uncertain. The deaths might not be peaceful. But the desire for control over one's death is powerful enough that people take the risk. Synthetic cannabinoids evolve constantly. Each generation is different. The original spice products in the early 2000s contained JEV compounds, relatively mild. Current generations contain substances like phon, pinica, which sounds like random letters, because that's what happens when you're designing molecules to evade regulation. These new compounds are incredibly potent, incredibly dangerous. Mass overdose events, entire groups of people collapsing simultaneously, seizures, cardiac arrest, deaths. This is what happens when you ban the relatively safe version of something. The replacement is always worse. The people using synthetic cannabinoids aren't using them for fun. They're using them because they're on probation and cannabis shows up on drug tests, but synthetics don't. They're using them because they're incarcerated and synthetics can be sprayed on paper and smuggled in. They're using them because they're cheap. These are desperate choices, not recreational ones. The solution is ending prohibition, ending drug testing for cannabis, treating addiction instead of criminalizing it. The solution is obvious. The implementation is politically impossible. You inherit a world where gabapentinoids are being abused. Gabapentin and pregabalin, prescribed for nerve pain and seizures, produce euphoria at high doses. People take 10, 20, 30 pills. The high is described as similar to benzos or alcohol. Dependence develops. Withdrawal exists, though less studied than other drugs. Doctors prescribe these thinking they're safe, non-addictive alternatives to opiates or benzos. They're mostly safe. They're not non-addictive. Anything that produces euphoria has abuse potential. The belief that we can engineer perfect drugs without downsides has failed repeatedly. It will fail again. Kratom occupies strange legal space. Legal federally in the US, but banned in several states. It's an opioid, but a mild one. People use it for pain, for opiate withdrawal, recreationally. It works, it has side effects. Dependency happens. Withdrawal happens. It's less dangerous than prescription opiates. Much less dangerous than street opiates. Harm reduction advocates support it. The FDA opposes it. Attempts to schedule it federally have failed due to public pushback. Millions of people use kratom daily. Banning it would create suffering, drive people to more dangerous alternatives. The FDA doesn't care about this. The FDA cares about control, about maintaining pharmaceutical industry monopoly on opioids. The research on kratom is limited, which is used to argue it's dangerous, which is circular logic. It's unresearched because it's quasi-legal and difficult to study. It's considered dangerous because it's unresearched. Meanwhile, millions of people are doing their own research, self-experimenting, figuring out dosing, managing side effects. Crowdsourced pharmacology is happening regardless of official channels. The wisdom of crowds isn't always wise, but it's more responsive than institutional research. You're born into a world where tianeptine is being sold at gas stations. Tianeptine, an antidepressant in some countries, unregulated in many US states, sold as dietary supplement. Except it's an opioid. Atypical, but it binds mu opioid receptors. At antidepressant doses, it's fine. At the doses people take recreationally, it's highly addictive. Withdrawal is brutal, reportedly worse than heroin. People use it because it's legal, available, and works. Then they can't stop. Then they're taking bottles per day. Then they're in withdrawal after 6 hours. This is entirely predictable and entirely preventable. Regulate it or ban it. Instead, it remains in limbo, destroying lives while legislators slowly become aware it exists. You inherit phenibut for social anxiety. Phenibut is a gabapentinoid, also a GABA B agonist, similar to Gebi in some ways. It reduces anxiety dramatically. It produces euphoria. It's legal in the US. Available online as a supplement. People use it for presentations, for dates, for any situation causing anxiety. It works better than prescribed anxiety medications for some people. It also causes dependence rapidly. Tolerance develops. Withdrawal includes psychosis, hallucinations, seizures. The dosing curve is steep. What works this week might not work next week. People escalate. People develop problems. Another substance marketed as safe that's anything but. The supplement industry exploits regulatory gaps systematically. If a substance isn't scheduled, it can be sold. If it can be sold, it will be marketed. If it's marketed, people will buy it. Many suffer consequences. The FDA occasionally intervenes. But slowly, after harm is documented. The pattern repeats constantly. New substance appears, gets popular, harms people, gets banned. Replacement substance appears. The industry is profitable. The incentive is launching products quickly, capturing market before regulation happens. Consumer safety is secondary. You're born into the age of research chemicals dominating the drug market. Traditional drugs are known quantities. Research chemicals are experiments. New psychedelics, 2X family, Dox family. Embalm compounds which killed people because they're incredibly potent and people dose them like lest. New stimulants, 3, MMC4, MMCHP, a PVP. The zombie drug that caused Florida face eating incidents and launched 1,000 hysterical news articles. New dissociatives mix, 3, MeO-PCP, OPC. New synthetic cannabinoids constantly. New opioids constantly. The pace of novel substance development exceeds regulatory capacity by orders of magnitude. The people using research chemicals are taking unknown risks for uncertain benefits. Some research chemicals become popular, get studied, become known quantities. Most don't. Most are used briefly, cause problems, or don't disappear when something newer arrives. The users are essentially volunteering for human trials without institutional oversight, without safety monitoring, without follow-up. Some do this knowingly, excited by novelty, willing to accept risk. Others do this unknowingly, thinking they bought Minma but received methadone, or thinking they bought Lost but received Twififeinbohm. The information asymmetry is dangerous. Drug checking services help but aren't universally available. You inherit a world where the dark web gets darker. Monero replaces Bitcoin for better privacy. Decentralized markets appear, impossible to shut down completely. Law enforcement adapts, infiltrates, arrests, and makes no lasting difference. The war on drugs has moved online and is failing online just as it failed offline. The methods change. The outcome doesn't. You're born into a world where addiction treatment is mostly ineffective because it's mostly abstinence. Based on abstinence is the hardest possible outcome. 12-step programs dominate. They help some people enormously. The success rates are modest, maybe 5-10% long-term sobriety, estimates vary. The programs are free, available, and based on spiritual awakening, which works for people seeking that and alienates people who aren't. Alternatives exist, but are less prevalent: smart recovery, refuge recovery, harm reduction programs. The diversity helps. No single approach works for everyone. The rehab industry is largely unregulated. Luxury rehabs charge tens of thousands of dollars for 28 days, which is an arbitrary time frame chosen because that's what insurance covers. The amenities are nice. The outcomes aren't particularly better than cheaper options. Celebrity rehabs cycle the same people through repeatedly. Relapse is normal, expected, part of the process. Framing it as failure is counterproductive. But the rehab industry has financial incentive in relapse, in repeat customers. Some facilities are ethical, many are exploitative. The desperate and their families can't tell the difference. Florida had a sober home crisis, patient brokering, fraudulent testing, insurance fraud, operators paying people to relapse so they could bill insurance again. The whole system was corrupt. Regulations tightened eventually. The problem hasn't disappeared, just relocated to areas with less oversight. Wherever there's money in addiction, exploitation follows. The solution is removing profit motive from treatment. That requires systemic change nobody's pursuing. You inherit forced treatment as policy in some places. Cursed rehab. The choice between jail and treatment isn't really a choice. Drug courts funnel people into programs. Compliance is monitored. Failure means incarceration. This is presented as compassionate, as treating addiction instead of punishing it. It's still coercion. It still strips autonomy. Treatment under duress has lower success rates than voluntary treatment, but it satisfies the public desire to do something, to respond to addiction with intervention rather than acceptance. Whether forcing treatment is ethical depends on your values. Autonomy versus paternalism, freedom versus protection, individual rights versus collective welfare. You're born into a world conducting an enormous experiment with legalization, while simultaneously maintaining prohibition. The contradictions are everywhere. Cannabis legal in some states, illegal federally. Psychedelics moving toward medical approval while remaining Schedule I. The incoherence is policy as patchwork, as compromise, as evolution without design. This is frustrating if you want consistency. This is maybe the only way change happens in a democracy, incrementally, with backward steps, with constant renegotiation. The international drug control regime is crumbling. The undrugged conventions assume prohibition. Countries are ignoring them. Canada legalized cannabis in violation of treaty obligations. Other countries will follow. The US, which forced much of international prohibition, is now subverting it at the state level while maintaining it federally. The cognitive dissonance is complete. The old order is dying. The new order hasn't formed. This liminal space is chaos, but also possibility. Policies that seemed unchangeable are changing. Institutions that seemed permanent are adapting or becoming irrelevant. You inherit a future that's uncertain. Drug policy might liberalize globally. Harm reduction might become standard. Treatment might become accessible and evidence-based. Or prohibition might entrench further. Enforcement might intensify. The pendulum might swing back toward moral panic and zero tolerance. Both futures are possible. Which one emerges depends on politics, on public opinion, on whether the lessons of the past century are learned or ignored. The fundamental question remains: what relationship should humans have with consciousness alteration? Prohibition says none. This is unrealistic. Humans have always altered consciousness. They will always alter consciousness. The drive is fundamental, maybe even adaptive. Maybe the capacity for chemical transcendence is valuable. Maybe it's dangerous. Probably both. Harm reduction says people will use drugs. Minimize the harm. This is pragmatic. This accepts reality. This saves lives. It also abandons the goal of a drug-free society, which bothers people who believe that goal is attainable or desirable. You're born into a species that needs drugs, or thinks it needs drugs, or has organized its entire civilization around drugs, being both necessary and forbidden. The contradiction is so normalized that questioning it seems radical. Coffee is required for productivity. Alcohol is required for socializing. Cannabis is required for relaxation. Antidepressants are required for mood. Stimulants are required for focus. Psychedelics are required for meaning. Or none of these are required, and we've constructed a drug-dependent culture that could be otherwise, but isn't and won't be. The prescription isn't clear. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe humans just muddle through, using what works, suffering consequences, adapting, and starting again. This is the history. This will be the future. You inherited all the benefits, the harms, the freedoms, the controls, the wisdom of generations, and the catastrophic mistakes. What you do with this inheritance is up to you. The pharmacopoeia is vast, the risks are real. The potential is genuine. Choose carefully. Or don't. Your ancestors rarely did. It worked out okay for the species, less well for many individuals. The pattern continues. You are the pattern continuing. Congratulations, you're human. This is what that means.